what really started to get me was like, instead of hearing all the waveforms like crash across each other in the room and reflect and kind of like mask things, I'm like, yo, why does like the 7th fret is just not in tune compared to the 5th fret? And like, are my instruments not set up properly? And do I bend this string all the time on accident? And it's like, not for writing the songs or anything, but just like in terms of performance, I was like, I have got to get better.
Hello again, and welcome back, friends, to another episode of The Record Process. This week, we're joined by the gentlemen from a band called Hot Mulligan to discuss their writing process across their releases and ultimately revisit the time they spent recording at the Barbershop Studios in Hopatcong, New Jersey a few years back. We dig into what it was like working with producer Brett Romnes on the band's 2020 album, You'll Be Fine, as guitarist Chris Freeman and vocalist Nathan Sanville walk us through some of the most creatively fulfilling moments for them on the record, punctuated by a few of the less glamorous events along the way. We hear the guys weighing the perks and challenges that came along with upgrading from wedges to in-ear monitors, and how that transition shaped the band's demoing process, as well as the live performance of these songs. Hot Mulligan is not only a band that's known for their high-energy live sets, but also for the raw conviction that they put into the performance of their songs. And I think this interview really shines a light on how bands like theirs can approach capturing that kind of intangible quality in a studio recording, which, as many of you probably know, is not always an easy feat. So here we go. So many of the albums that we'll be highlighting this season on The Record Process share one very important theme. And that's the idea of technology helping musicians and creators overcome the collaborative restrictions that once came along with geographic location. Thanks to companies like Audio Movers, real-time remote audio production and the tools that make it possible are more powerful than ever. Their groundbreaking Listen To plugin allows you to stream, record, and collaborate on high-quality audio in real time and is used on a daily basis by world-class audio engineers and professionals at places like Capitol and Abbey Road Studios. Their new Pro plan allows you to stream up to 150 users simultaneously, includes custom branding, and even allows you to stream MIDI data in real time. So head on over to audiomovers.com and enter the code RECORDPRO to get 1 month free off your Pro membership today. So as you already know, we do a lot of talking about the creation of original music here on The Record Process. I mean, that's kind of our thing. But it can also be fun to put your own spin on an old classic and tell the world something else about yourself through something like a cover song. Cover songs can be a really interesting way to connect with your existing fan base, or even a way to put yourself in front of new audiences through shared musical tastes. And our friends at DistroKid have made it super simple to upload a cover of your favorite song while allowing them to handle all of the back-end licensing work that can really be a headache for independent artists. DistroKid will notify the composer and publisher of its release, they will pay the necessary licensing fee, and they will take care of all the other legal red tape involved with releasing a cover song on a streaming platform, allowing you to fully focus on enjoying the process of putting your unique artistic spin on that recording. If you're already a DistroKid member, you can access this as you're uploading your track for $12 a year per song. Or if you're not yet a member and you'd like to sign up for DistroKid, you can use the link in our show notes to get 30% off of your first year's membership. Gents, listen, super rad that y'all could take some time here. One, super, excited about the impending marrying of loudnesses, if you will, coming next year. So that's also why this is kind of like, I think will be super cool and serendipitous, so that I can drop this right around that time and will be super fun and neat. But also because actually what's funny enough is, this is a good place to start, maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, but y'all did the record with Brett. At least that's what I've been under the impression of. And we've been talking about having either Brett on or, covering a record with somebody that did their shit at the barbershop, because Tom and I have both worked out of there a bunch with different projects over the years. And that spot is great. for a number of reasons, but also so is Brett. So this is actually like serendipitous when I was like, fuck, dude, maybe we talk about the
also,
record. Yes.
Yeah, did y'all do the pre-pro at Gary's?
No, we did our last EP at Gary's, but we
Okay.
did everything for this record at the barbershop.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I remember Gary with other studio partner and myself designed Gary's studio.
Yeah.
Oh, sick.
Oh, okay.
And he was like, "Oh, dude, yeah, have the Hot Mulligan boys
Right,
over for like
yeah.
a month or something." Yeah.
Yeah.
That studio is awesome too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, that space is good. Tom and our other studio partner, Adam, are highly responsible for a good portion of the design that you saw over there. He's got a lovely, lovely little spot. Gary's a very good friend of ours, too. So this is a lot of nice serendipitous worlds colliding. But yeah, with that said, I mean, it's a podcast, but it's not the kind of podcast that's like, if you were a unicorn, what would your name be and what color would your horn be? It's definitely more about kind of, diving into the process of said record. And we're excited to do a little bit of that and see where it goes and tell a little bit of that story, So, I mean, should be easy enough. I mean, we already have plenty. We could probably wrap it up here and just get some really solid edits for the socials going. And that would be fine. But I guess we'll continue on since I
can say more sketchy shit if you really need me to.
I mean, if it comes out naturally, I don't want to tell you, like you can curse and you also can say whatever you want. I will just very much maybe just if you want to say your name so that everybody knows whose voice signature is yours, then I can just, from an evidence standpoint, that'll be good. But no, gentlemen of Hot Mulligan, thank you for being here on the record process. We have called you here and ask for some of your time to unpack the making of your 2020 full-length album, You'll Be Fine. That is what we would love to do. And I would love to start maybe a little bit beforehand and talk about the previous releases. It's been interesting, obviously, like Chris, there's been some moving around, like some role playing, shifting stuff, right? So I'd love to, like, the journey starts a little bit before that, right? But so talk for a second about where y'all were kind of going into the writing of that full length based on like the previous releases, right?
Well, You'll Be Fine was kind of similar to the first one. I would say we had a little more time to write that record. But both of our first two full lengths, we wrote the bulk of them within like a couple weeks span and just decided we have to write a record now. This is the time we will do it. And then we will book the studio dates afterwards. So You'll Be Fine, we wrote most of it in my parents' basement in I want to say it was March 2019, maybe it was April. And then we hit the studio later that year in like August. And we had like no extra finished songs when we got there. We had exactly the amount of songs we needed to do to make the record. And that was the record that we made.
I love that.
Did we make anything in studio?
We wrote some lyrics for You'll Be Fine in studio, but the like how the songs went and everything was done before we went. Besides Backyard. Backyard was one song that we were writing during sound check on our first headlining tour. And then that one came together in the studio.
Very nice. So what is that, right? So writing in the basement, right? Ahead of the studio before you like book the time, put it on the calendar. I'm curious because I think every band has their own kind of internal writing dynamics and process. Obviously, like every song's different in time and place. But I'd love to, and we've maybe like talked about this a little bit, just chatting in our past, like passings. But what does that look like for Hot Mulligan for y'all? I'm curious. I think it's interesting because the songs you come away with are super dynamic, super in your face, right? And where does that start, right? Does it start from a lyrical place? Does it start from a conceptual place, a musical place, right?
So historically, it's pretty much always started with a guitar riff, and you can kind of hear that happen in the record where most of the songs start with the guitar or guitar and vocals.
Yeah.
We went against the grain a couple times and realized that every song did start with a guitar riff. So we would say like, let's start with drums here instead. But pretty much we just start jamming a riff, and then Brandon, our drummer, would start adding drums underneath, and we'd ride it out until it's time to switch the part. Sometimes we would instinctually like feel like where we're all supposed to go with the song, And then other times we would stop and be like, what happened? And I don't know, let's just do it again. And then I'll try something. And then if that's the move, like we'll know it's the move and we'll jam there. We know the next move. So yeah, it's guitar riff, jam on it, instinct for the next part, pretty much over and over.
Dude, I love that. It's a very organic, very rock band oriented way to kind of feel your way through the moves and just keep constantly trying shit as you shift, right? And I think, and that's It seems so simple when you say it like that, but it takes time, and it is relying on just like, like when I find it, we'll know it. Like when we hear what happens, we'll know it, right? And I think what's cool about that, and especially I think we've talked about this a little bit, and it definitely comes up on the show with artists that are in more of like a kind of conventional band setting. But I think that is how you get the kind of songs that clearly like your audience and your fan base responds to very enthusiastically, for, you know what I mean? Like, to say the least, right? Because I think they're tapping into that same kind of momentum, that you're kind of trying to mine as you write. So when you're demoing or writing, like what does the demoing process look like ahead of the studio before you even call up Brett, before you even book the time, right? Like, are you multi-tracking these? Are you doing just like throwing a iPhone in the middle of the room? Like what's the approach to it, if anything?
We used to be just like iPhone in the room, or I guess I'll backtrack a little bit. So prior to You'll Be Fine, we did a lot of things on acoustic guitar and vocals first, and like would write a song like singer-songwritery style. But then when we got to You'll Be Fine, we did this jamming thing instead. And we had just gotten our in-ear monitor set up at the time. So we were like working on that for ourselves. And then once we'd like figured out how a song went, we just plugged in a laptop USB and then multi-tracked that in Logic, and then just had it with like all the same settings we were running through our mixer. So like with all that EQ and compression on, and then just didn't touch it anymore once it was in the DAW.
Okay, cool. So you were just kind of capturing the live take of it, and those were the demos that you took into the studio, right?
Yep.
Okay. How and this is interesting because with Wonder Years, we went through a similar process, right? When we kind of shifted from wedges, from a monitoring standpoint, and just like playing fucking loud stage, to kind of doing the IEM rig, and that has a lot of pros and cons, of course, and it's a transition for whether you're a guitar player, a drummer, especially for vocalists. So I'm curious, this was the first record that y'all were writing with that setup. Did that feel differently? How do you think that maybe changed the way you responded or tried certain things in that demo process?
For me, it felt less fatiguing because it wasn't always like the loudest amp blaring at you all the time. And it was also refreshing to like hear vocals, because any band who's like jammed in a basement and used like a couple wedges to try to put the vocals over the amp when you're doing the volume wars, you're like, yeah, man, what words are you saying? I can't really hear anything. So it started to feel like a little pro when we were doing it, and fresh, and like relieving. It was a lot of things. It was just all good, honestly, at least in the basement. Live setting the first few times doing the in-ears was a different story.
Yeah, it was a problem.
Totally.
It's a whole other animal. Yeah. Yeah, Tads, how is that for you, dude? I'm because like I said, it's always every individual in a band has their own perspective, especially about making that transition and what it feels like and getting comfortable. How did you find that?
It fucking sucked.
Honestly, I was like, it's usually very polarizing. I was like, I feel like I'm going to get one thing or the other. Okay.
Now, hopping into ears, it's just like the stage isn't shaking anymore, because we have those Kempers now too, and it's like I can only feel the drums in my feet. There's no loud guitar screaming right behind me, so it was a lot harder to follow. As far as writing though, it was like I noticed I didn't have to scream as much, which was neat, because you do that for 12 hours and you're like, I guess I'll just never speak again. I don't need to do that.
Yet somehow you still end up doing that on the record a little bit. So, because that's which is actually like funny enough, like all jokes aside, that's very much a part of like the delivery, right? And that's really what I think makes some of these songs do what they do in the way they do. So was that transition kind of trying out and testing out parts vocally, pushing that hard and doing that, you know, the way you were starting to kind of latch onto? Did that feel different? Did you get any bits of like, you know, because sometimes it feels too sterile in the ears, or it feels too perfect where it no longer feels like you're in the midst of the band. You know what I mean? At least that's what I've heard from, you know, our singer and a lot of other singers. So was writing and trying out some, you know, some lines and things like that different or harder at any points for any of these songs?
Yeah, that just like hearing my voice, like just pure how it is, like just dry in my ears, was very strange. Because, you know, when you're yelling in a place that you can't hear yourself, you can feel it all shaking, you can get the idea of what note you're on, but then it's just blasted right into your head and you hear exactly how you're doing and you're like, oh, this melody sucks. I could fix this. It doesn't sound as cool if I'm not screaming, you know? And like, as far as like the yelling that I do, like I learned mostly how to sing from listening to like Rise Against and Free Throw and like very yelly bands.
Yeah.
So like, I don't think there was a chance that ever would go away, but upon hearing myself in such clarity for the first time like that, like I could see how other singers like just do it, you know?
Totally. Well,
yeah.
I mean, like with this newfound clarity, did that impact any, like, can y'all remember like a specific moment during this like pre-pro basement writing session that you're like, oh shit, we would never come up with this idea if we didn't have like in-ears, or if like we weren't hearing ourselves or like hearing ultra clarity of everything? What were there any moments because of the in-ears that like?
I would say analog fade for me anyway, like singing in that low octave. I'm still not super good at singing like lower in my like actual register, but that song came together as just like a very homage to Midwest emo, like just a little slow bop, a couple weird things about it, weird time signature things. And I think instinctually I always want to yell, but could hear myself, so I didn't have to. It was neat.
Yeah, that's a great example, dude. Because I know, you know, sometimes it's a lot easier, especially coming from like the hall show, like floor show. And I feel like Dan has mentioned this, or like we've gotten in conversation about this at least a little bit. If not, we certainly will on the tour even more, where it's like some of those habits that you learn early on are from just like the basement setting. Everything's fucking loud. It's all chaos. You're just trying to hear yourself. I know that's, and Dan has said this a lot. It's like, that's why he cups his mic like this, because he's used to like trying to just make that mid-range of a vocal poke through in a VFW hall so he can hear himself, because there's no wedges or anything. And that's still like, you know, old habits die hard in that sense. But yeah, it's like he's talked about that same thing when you can actually hear and like control breath and note stuff. You start to feel more comfortable expanding where you want to go, and or at least trying some things out that would never be a possibility. So that's a great example. And I think it helps some other, you know, characteristics and complexities of the band start to shine through. Chris, were there any things like, and I felt like from an instrumental standpoint then too, I found even when we started using ears and like being able to hear back a lot of like the live take demos that we would do, starting to, you know, run through songs in like even before pre-pro, I started to hear, I mean, we've got 3 fucking guitar players. I started to really like across records, start to hear some more details of what my other guys were doing earlier in the process, and started to kind of like line up some dots, as opposed to getting to the studio and having someone be like, the fuck are you doing? Like, you're doing something completely, you know what I mean? Like you're rubbing like a half, like shit like that in passing that, you know, so I started noticing some things earlier. Were there moments like that too for you on an instrumental end, you know, before you took them into the studio, that you started seeing some things line up?
Definitely with like just getting like guitar and like bass notes synced up, it was way easier to like distinguish what's happening and be like, oh, that's like definitely not the note we're going for here. But as far as like songwriting and the composition outside of that, not really so much. But what really started to get me was like instead of hearing all the waveforms like crash across each other in the room and reflect and kind of like mask things, I'm like, yo, why does like the 7th fret is just not in tune compared to the 5th fret? And like, are my instruments not set up properly? And do I bend this string all the time on accident? And it's like, not for writing the songs or anything, but just like in terms of performance, I was like, I have got to get better.
Dude, that's some of what becomes so fucking mind-numbing, especially as a guitar player too. Like when you get to the studio and everything's under a microscope and you're like overdubbing or trying to like really put stuff in its lane and kind of nail it, you're like, that's when you start to like be like, well, the 100 times that I've played through this before, I never noticed that. But now when it's isolated, yeah. And someone turns around, it's like, is that thing intonated? It's like, yeah, I mean, I had it worked on. It's like, not in that key, it's not.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
dude, and that's a great thing. I mean, and what a good point too, because like any record you make, it's the sum of all parts, right? And that's the shit that you're playing on is one of those big components. So hearing that and identifying that, and also, dude, I love that you mentioned like, am I bending this chord a little bit? Because the answer a lot of times for dudes like us that grow up playing like power chord and like punk rock, the answer is probably yes, right? So and finding that out a little earlier is at least helpful to be like, okay, cool. I am aware that I tend to do that with this chord change or jumping from here to here. So that at least when you get to the studio, you know, you're not like, fuck.
Yeah.
I didn't even know I was doing that. At least, you know, even if, you know, you might have to, you know, have a few cracks at it in there when it's game time. But dude, that's a great point. And I love that. And it's, I think, super important to like kind of pull that out of what like having that clarity while writing and getting ready for the studio can do, you know, kind of jumping forward, right? So you have, you know, these songs written, right? You know what the record's going to consist of. Enter Mr. Brett Romnes, right? And the studio and all of that, who you had worked with before, correct?
You'll Be Fine was the first time doing that with him.
Okay, cool. So then let's, so then I'm curious, how did you all get connected with him? What was the you know, process like there, talking about doing the record with him?
I think our friends in Free Throw went to him just before us, and then our drummer's other band, Kayak Jones, they had gone there right before us, and our drummer Brandon was like, we have to go here. Like, this is the guy. He's like hands-on, but he's like not telling you how to write your songs or making his record. He's like, he's elevating your record, which is something we value and take really seriously.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Awesome. So then did you have kind of like you get on the phone with Brett, or did you know, what was kind of the next step to feel out if that relationship was good? I mean, that's obviously a ringing endorsement from somebody internally, but there's always, you know, other questions, right?
He called me a few times, I think, before he went out, just to like check in 2 or 3 times and be like, hey, so what instruments are you going to bring? What amps do you use? Like, how is the songwriting process coming along? How do you feel about like this production technique, like percussion wise and like stuff like that? And just talking to him on the phone, I was like, this is the type of guy like we're on the same wavelength as. It was like, after talking to him once, I knew that's where we had to make our record.
Amazing. So the record came out in 2020, but what time period did y'all go up to the studio to track it?
I believe it was August 2019. It might have been the end of July, but it was right around like the summer's winding down, and it's like maybe it's about to get cold for the year, but it definitely wasn't cold yet because we were staying in like above an Italian restaurant in an old office space with no AC.
Dog crash
just,
pad, dude.
Yeah.
Sweating balls every day. So it wasn't that late in the year.
Frame that for everybody too, because when I first met the Boston Manor dudes and a bunch of other bands that stay there, it's like, it's an interesting, the studio itself is kind of an interesting configuration. It's on a lake, but it's really like, there's not a whole lot else around. Paint that picture and what you're like, for everybody that hadn't been there, what the first impression kind of was walking in and getting situated.
So hang on, the crash pad. I have a perfect little story. where there's a couch in the corner. There are like no windows in this room. I was laying on the couch and I was playing little games on my phone, and everyone was laying down. No one was doing anything. We were getting ready to go to sleep. And a portion of the ceiling falls loudly onto the floor next to Spice. And we all look to see what it was and kind of decide this is just what the crash pad is like. And we all went to bed that night knowing that we're not that safe. It was beautiful, truly.
Well, I'm glad no one was hurt in the process. Did the rest of the structure
Stay intact?
stay together? Or
I would say generally.
It was kind of similar to like the places Tades and I grew up, where it was super rural. There's a lake. Can't say that about a lot of places, honestly, but there were lakes near where Tades and I grew up, and just these like windy roads with like no passing lanes or anything. You can't really walk to shit. You have to drive somewhere if you want food or something. So you pull up to this like lakefront area, and it was just a church. But then you walk inside and it's like a studio like we couldn't have dreamed of, like showing up in, like huge SSL console, like big control room with like 5 pairs of speakers, and the live room's got these huge ceilings and like stained glass windows. It's like, holy shit. And then they're like, and here's where you'll be sleeping. And then we walked over to the office. And it's like, cool. They're like, we don't have much in here, but if you guys want to like get some cots or something, like you can sleep on those.
Right. Yeah. Everything goes towards the record making, not necessarily the amenities. Although the lounge downstairs and everything, like it is a cool complex and they have other rooms, but it's just funny because I've heard the same thing, like the reviews of that space itself.
Yeah.
But yeah, but and if anybody looks up this space online or two, that's also like the live room itself has like it, was kind of like a very old building, like converted church style thing. So it has a really amazing sound, high cathedral ceilings, and it's that and that console that so much of it goes into an incredible drum sound, right? And especially for a rock record, that ends up being the foundation of a really, really great sounding record, right? And like a really, doing all the things that you want it to do. So especially as a drummer, so you come out of tracking drums in that room, and you're like, we got to do everything here, you know. So it's it's a really cool space, and that control room is great as well. The A room up there, I even think too, if I remember correctly, there's like a TV that pops up between the near field monitors, and occasionally when we've been in there, like throw something on. Was that part of? So I mean, like so we move out of there, right? Like we're diving into tracking, okay? So like, what's like the first steps, like kind of like day one of diving into the record with Brett? Where do you go? How do you set up, that the whole time frame, to start tracking the record?
Yeah. So at this point, we were still using pedal boards because we hadn't converted to digital yet. So we like brought our pedal boards in, shot out some amp tones and stuff. Brandon like shot out a few snares and got the drums tuned up and everything. And then I was kind of expecting like, all right, do you want to load up our demos and get into the session and like work on them like that? And Brett was like, no, I don't want to hear your demos, which was like kind of, it was interesting at first. It was like, I feel like you maybe like want to know how the songs go. He's like, I don't want to know how the songs go because if I hear them this way, I'll think of them that way. I want to hear you just like do them as like a piece, and then like we can talk about it from there. So I think we just like scratched a song out at a time, playing like guitar and drums through the song and like humming some melodies, maybe getting a scratch vocal in there.
That's awesome. So keeping that objectivity was top of mind for Brett. He was like, I don't want any sounds or like predetermined notions. He wanted to get that first initial impression for himself out of y'all just playing, which is great, which I love, and is tactically speaking can be really helpful, especially if something accidental happens in that moment. And if, cause like bands can often come in like kind of having fallen into the demoitis trap too, exactly, and be over rehearsed. but maybe you mess something up or fuck something up in a weird way the first time through that like scratch take, but it ends up being really cool. And if someone like that hasn't heard it the other way a bunch of times, you can be like, no, trust me, this is it. If you're an audio engineer or musician that's dedicated to creating and releasing new music consistently, then you already know that process can be long, complex, and often expensive, especially while you're trying desperately not to sacrifice the type of quality that is crucial for your mixes to stand up to those big budget productions. Producer and friend of the record process, Jay Moss, has reimagined these roadblocks to quality that plague us all. With the help of world-renowned sound engineers, Jay developed an AI-based platform called Master, which offers you the ability to quickly upload your song and receive a high-quality mastered edition in minutes, all at a price point that won't break the bank with each new mix revision. The platform also allows you to easily collect feedback from clients and collaborators, and it even caters to the perfectionist in us all by allowing you to quickly compare and contrast different iterations of each track as you make those final subtle tweaks. So for a limited time this season, you as a Record Process listener can not only try Master for free, but you can also receive a 20% discount on your first membership by using the code PROCESS on their website at checkout. So hit the link in our show notes or visit maastr.io for more info. So a lot of people think that Oxford Pennant makes, well, pennants. You know, the triangular wool flag type things that usually have like a sports team's logo or the name of a place printed on them. Well, to be honest, that is what I thought too before my band The Wonder Years had the chance to work with them. Through that process, we realized just how much care they put into their beautifully crafted, iconic keepsakes that remind us who we are and why we do what we do. They've teamed up with some massive artists in the process, bands like My Chemical Romance, Wilco, and 21 Pilots, just to name a few. And they even offer custom shop orders for artists, companies, and unique events or special occasions. So please do yourself a favor and head over to oxfordpennant.com and use the code RECORD15 to receive 15% off your first retail purchase from their web store. So did you start working through a song at a time, so to speak, in that way? Or did you get scratch tracks for the whole record, so to speak, and then start working back?
We did a song at a time.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah, which was refreshing for sure.
Totally. So how long did y'all have in the studio at that point then?
Wasn't it just shy of a month?
Yeah, just shy.
From like almost like the song at a time approach, were there any moments on the on any of the tracks that were like kind of one of the moments that Casey was just speaking of, like that Brett was like, oh wait, no, this has to be, this should be like this, or like a guitar tone, or like it doesn't have to be like a big structure change, but like anything like that, like doing it that particular way led to something that like came to live on the record as it breathes.
I think overall it was just like a good workflow to do it that way, because prior we had done like, all right, let's do all the drums, and then by the time you get to guitars, if all the drums are done, it's like, well, like you kind of got to play the guitar like this because that's what the drums did 2 weeks ago, or something like that. It's like, I don't feel like 2 weeks ago anymore. I feel like what I'm doing right now. So
that's great, dude.
Like go in there and recut it then, because this is what I think it should be like now. So that was like a thing we were always able to do, is like get to a part after like the drums were done, be like, it's just a little bit different. And then on a couple of songs, there were like a few rhythms where like we weren't sure if we were doing that like the triplet thing, or if we're kind of swinging that like dotted quarter note or dotted eighth note type deal. And he's like, I know it seems minimal, but it's like, it's really important that we decide right now if we're doing triplets or if we're doing this swing thing. And so like stuff like that would come up, and just sometimes he'd bring out a little pedal and he'd be like, what do you think about this? And he'd slap it on and just start turning a dial, and crazy sounds would happen that we weren't doing before. And then we're like, oh, run that back. Like, I want to turn the dial now and do my version of that.
Oh, dude, yeah, you got to play, and that's the thing, and that room and that control room too. It's like it's set up beautifully for some serious mad scientist level shit. You know, like
Yeah.
you have the SSL, and then behind it you have like the patch bay and all the outboard rack gear. But then those serve as kind of two desks where it's like you're stacking amps, 1,000 pedals, everything in front of you. So it's a very creative space in that control room, and I love that, and I love the fact that so this is a big one, especially for rock bands. When we talk about this, right, Tom, and like every band, and every project, it ends up, being a little differently, and some can benefit, but this from other ways. But in this case, y'all had done let's do all the drums in this many days, and then all the guitar, whatever. But sometimes, and when you have the ability to leave a kit and everything mic'd up, and you only have that ability when you have a studio that has enough channels and can leave that stuff dedicated, right, to do this way, you get the pleasure of, as a guitarist, being like, no, I think we should do it this way. And normally you're like, well, the drums are already doing this, so that's what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
But you can be like, nah, you can go back in there and you can just retread, which and there's a really great organic power to being able to have that hindsight strength all the way through the process, right? That's awesome. Was there anything that you remember specifically then, really benefiting from that and changing like last minute about things before the record was finished that, that if you had done it the other way, the previous way, you wouldn't have been able to do?
I think our drummer Brandon really benefited from that a lot, especially because he'd play through the songs a bunch and then he'd feel like satisfied with the take or something, but he's so hyper like analytical of all of his fills or something. So if he then noticed like same sort of triplet fill 3 or 4 times on the record, then he's like, nah, I'm not doing that. Like I need to go back and do it so that I don't do the same fill, and like that I really make every fill unique. And I don't remember a time for me specifically being like, I'm so glad we went and changed this right here, but just mentally I felt way more at ease and like happy with what we were doing, as opposed to like getting bummed out when you hear like, well, that's the way it is and you can't change it.
Yeah.
It's like, I know it can be changed. I can fix it. And even just that comfort made me feel better.
That's awesome.
Were y'all going back and listening to the songs that you previously cut while like you had the flexibility to go back and change stuff, but like making a record is as much about like the time spent in the studio as the time spent out of the studio, especially in a destination like barbershop and like that kind of stuff. But were y'all like pumping the like tracks that y'all cut earlier that day in your headphones at night to like analyze the stuff, or were you kind of just like, this stays in the studio? Yeah.
It stays in the studio, and then we go to the crash pad and we don't listen to it. Yeah, because I mean that's Tom. That's great. Yeah, it's like were y'all doing the like, yo, can you bounce this down real quick so I can go listen to it like afterwards? Or
yeah,
yes, okay.
Yeah, I live on bounces. I need them. I'm a slow writer, so we get the bounces. I'd sit in the crash pad where the ceiling's falling down on us, and I'd write as much as I could, and like. Having bounces there at the barbershop, there's so many little corners to sneak off to and just sit in the corner and like try to do your thing. It's nice. I like doing it that way. It's a sick opportunity to be afforded.
Yeah, that's a really great perspective there, especially like as a vocalist, like you need that time to kind of be able to go away, because it's, I mean, even writing as a band is one thing, but there's a lot of pressure, especially on a vocalist, to come up with something in the moment. I think it's a little different. Guitar, you can kind of just like, where's your hand going? Drums, you can play around with some different fills, different feels. But I feel like you're probably not alone in that, in terms of being like needing to find some spaces to go just like be isolated and do that kind of deep work. Yeah, in the studio, that place is, because it's a large building, large complex. There's other rooms, there's downstairs, there's upstairs crash pad. That it does afford you that, where you can kind of go sneak off and do that with those bounces in real time. That's a great point.
Yeah, yeah, dude. There's
Yeah, I thought it was
By
sick.
any chance, did that grand piano land on any part, like snuck in to any part of the record?
On You'll Be Fine, we didn't use the piano at all, but we did use the organ, which I was really stoked about.
Well, the reason why I bring up that piano is, I don't know if Brett told you, but you can MIDI into it.
Yeah, we've done that since, and it's really cool. It's really cool.
Right.
Yeah, dude. That apparently that was Chick Corea's grand.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Barbershop it's like not only does it have the nooks and crannies that you can go and hide out and write some dope lyrics to, but like it has nooks and crannies of toys everywhere, like musical and like gear wise. Yeah, it's a fun spot. It's a fun spot.
Yeah, we had some bongos that made it on the record. That
we love some dirty.
Yeah, he was like the collective soul left them.
Oh, from upstairs.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, from upstairs. I've slept there on a project many years ago with those bongos staring at me and all the stuff on his walls. Yeah, so that's all. So and this is a fun part of it too, because there's so much gear. The mic closet over there, the outboard gear and everything. What was it? So the bongos made it on there, the organ made it on there, right? What was the were there any standout things? And even when it goes like vocally, anything that that you tried that was a little bit unorthodox, or any kind of like eureka, like mad scientist moment, whether it was Brett or y'all, something that he pulled out of left field that really like kind of made a cool, memorable moment for you with this one?
The Vibra Slap made it out, I think, 1 or 2 times on You'll Be Fine, which is like
Vibra Slap.
Oh, yeah. Thank God, dude. Honestly, wherever Steve Evans is, fuck you, Steve. No, I love him to death, but there's a whole Vibra Slap running joke that we had with him. And so much so that I think we joked about like trying to replace all the snare hits with Vibra Slap samples, just to like fuck with him, because we really wanted it on a part one. So that has my heart already that y'all went down that road.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you had an aux percussion day, right? You went ham with some of that.
Yep.
To beef up the record.
Went crazy with that. And then we have this more like electronic based song on the record called SPS, where like 3/4 of the song is electric drums. And we had it as electric drums before we went to the studio, because I think when we were writing You'll Be Fine, not everyone showed up one day. So I was like, well, we could write a song without everyone here. Like, check this out. Like, programmed a little beat and some synth bass and started singing it. And then we got to it, and I was telling Brett, I'm like, yeah, but we plan on having electronic drums here, so like do like this kind of beat if you can. And he was like, why don't you just bounce out from your project and I'll bring it in here? And I was like, I don't know, I felt wrong about it. I was like, why would we use like my demo drum samples when we have all of this? And then he bounced them in, and he was like, sounds good to me. Let's go with it. And those were like the samples that made it on the record. So that was a really cool thing. Not even a thing that was found at the studio, but just something that was cool and felt creative, I guess.
Amazing. Yeah.
That's awesome. And not trying to overthink it, which is also the other side of it. You have so many options that sometimes there's that like that itching to be like, no, well, but we got to go do it for real now. Like, we're here, like now that's like, it's actual for real. We got to go redo it all, which no, you fucking don't. Right. Like sometimes like that sample or that demo moment, in like a very like, look at like if you're talking about like a Ben Gibbard like project or whatever, it's like so many of those things where it's just like, just go. And like you did like a little thing. It's like, don't ruin it. Like it has its thing. It has the charm. And if you got it right that first time, and you have that, like that other person, in this case, someone like Brett, that's like, no, this is great. Like it's doing exactly what I think you want it to do. Why would we waste time trying to go recreate something at the risk of maybe it not even being as good if this can just be it? So that's, dude, I love that about it. And knowing that, we're huge fans of when, like repurposing stuff or taking some little moment from a demo and cutting it up. And someone's like, what was that? It's like, that was from the scratch track. It just happened and we pulled it in, you know? Were there anything like, so let's talk vocals when it comes to that and what the vocal tracking looks like. Cause that, dude, that's a lot. That's a heavy undertaking to track this kind of, you know, for this vocal styling in the record, right? Like, talk to me about what that has to look like and how you like get through that, tracking, dude. I'm highly curious what that process looks like for you, especially in the studio.
Brett would only let me do one song per day because he didn't want me to blow my voice out, which I think is a good thing, but I'm excited and I want to sing more. But yeah, it's, for the most part, it was pretty simple and even.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just that one ISO booth that they have right next to Brett's room there, and I'm backing away a little bit and screaming, and occasionally we would open the door into the drum room, you know, and chuck the mic in there to record for like,
oh, awesome,
for
okay,
weird
cool.
distant sounding screams that we want, something with a bunch of room sound. But for the most part, I'm just I'm just yelling as hard as I can in that little stale room. I don't think we did much weirdness with it, really.
Well, there's such an energy there for, you know, from just like the tone of that and just like the 110% kind of like push behind it. But I love that. So talk to me a little bit about that, like the because I think for Brett probably too, it sounds like, you know, it was all about just capturing it, right? You know what I mean? Like just figuring out how to make that sound as good as it can. And I'm very much into this. So for people that can't see in like the vocal booth that you're describing, right? Because the layout of how it works is kind of interesting in that it affords you this cool opportunity where, like you said, so the vocal booth that you're in is kind of like almost to the left of, or well, off to the side of, it's almost like part of a hallway. Like if you would walk out of the back of the control room and then you kind of walk, you know, turn left, you would go into an isolated vocal booth. And then the other side of that, you would go through another door. And that's where like the big, large drum room, live room is, right? So you can actually like, with both doors closed, it's just a ISO booth. And that's, you know, that's where it sounds like you were tracking the majority of those vocals. But then you can actually open that one door to the control room, let all that sound out and turn on mics out there to get all of that kind of like reverberant live room sound. Were there any moments like specifically that, you know, that y'all used that technique and used those, or was that just something that he kind of always had going, you know, as a choice in the mix phase?
God, anytime we had like any sort of group vocal, we wanted that room sound for that, you know. And then he'd have the mics on for like the drums, and we'd have mics centered in that big room, and then we'd all just yell in different directions in that room so that the sound would bounce. And like it just sounds, it sounds dope. It's like, I don't know. Most of the music that I listen to is like iPhone recordings from emo kids in Chicago from 2001. And, and like, if you put an iPhone in a bathroom and you yell into the bathroom, it's going to sound cool. And every now and then Brett will be able to put something together like that. And it's cool. I learned just in our last trip there that he has like effects that he can throw on that simulate different room sounds. And that blew my mind. I didn't think I don't know. I'm kind of a music idiot, but just seeing that and being like, oh, so we could just make me sound like I'm in a cellar all of the time. Wouldn't that be neat?
Yes. I mean, it would. Is this, are you foreshadowing something? Is that is that where we're going with like Midwest cellar emo? Is that where we're going next? Or is that something that you've had the pleasure of hearing yourself back with in there?
Yeah. Cause I always love shit that sounds like that. Like just dirty, you know, I like voice cracking and bad recording. And, I was talking to him about it, and he would regularly set up that mic in the other room and just have me scream into it, and it always sounds cool. But we were just talking about that one day, and he had like some vocals that I had just recorded, and he ran like just clicking on different effects throughout that little list he had, and hearing how like weirdly accurately it can simulate the different room sound. It's nuts, dude. It was cool. Just like, I don't know. I never thought of that being a possibility. Technology is wild.
Technology is indeed wild. It's kind of messed up on like what you can do with technology. Honestly, it's crazy that we're even tracking this right now. And
Yeah.
I mean, like, we're all
that
not
honestly is what scares me the
remotely near each
most
other.
about thinking
Like-
about whoever like wrote the code to, hey, it's tracking each one of you individually and natively, but then also in real time uploading it to this other site, but then also downgrading the quality and streaming that to this website that you're all watching. I'm like, I would rather just, can you give me a guitar, please? And then it is, to be fair, like the Acoustisonics, and I say that, but I've had to like, as, in order to like create and make noise in some semblance of a creative fashion and finish projects. Yes, I have had to like, fall victim to and give over some of my time to trying to understand a bit more of that. But Tom has consistently blown my mind as an acoustician. We mentioned earlier he went to school in Michigan, not far from y'all, so and knows a whole lot more than I will probably ever know in terms of like the science of acoustics and simulating stuff like that. Tom, please.
You got it, bud.
But it is really scary how you can emulate so much of that stuff. And he's we'll unpack this at another date or talk more about this on tour. But it's honestly, that is like Tom's bread and butter when it comes to like scanning a room and telling you everything, you could ever possibly not even know was possible about knowing that room and the specifics of it from an acoustic standpoint.
I mean, dude, and well, like y'all already foreshadowed it with you move into the Kempers. Like what they're doing with like the amp sim technology is crazy.
It's pretty wild. Well, let's start there though. Let's start with the guitar sounds in your ears, because that's a different thing, right? And you as a vocalist, when it comes to being used to knowing how you want those songs to feel with your band, playing them in real time, how does that change to hear these, I mean, they're these emulated sounds, right? Being piped into your head right next to your vocal. Does that change? Is it cleaner for you? Is it too clean for you, right off the jump when you started trying to play these songs live?
Dude, talking to other singers about it too, like it just that first show that you play with ears after having monitors and just like room sound, it sucks. And it's incredibly crisp. Like everything is perfectly laid out and you hear it as it is 100%. And it's nuts because you're not used to that. It's not like, it's not reality. And it's all being routed right into your fucking head. So it's an insane transition. You have to practice with it beforehand.
And it's not bouncing around off of everything too, because that's when you're hearing like normal stage sound, you're hearing the sum of all of that chaos and early and late reflections and everything. You don't get any of that in the ears. You know what I mean? So it's sometimes too precise when you're used to hearing everything naturally mix and kind of like meld together in the room or on the stage. But so then, Chris, like, what does that look like for you then taking it?
Right.
How did you try to like kind of design these sounds, or, did you take the rigs that you remembered using in the studio, or was it, what was the approach in turning to the live replication of this?
Like with the Kempers and stuff?
Yeah.
So Ryan and I actually both made our own profiles of our own amps. And mine wasn't the same one that I used for Most of You'll Be Fine, which I used a Rocker Verb 100 when we were in the studio. And I believe he was using his JCM 800. And he has his JCM 800. So he profiled that for himself for his Kemper. And my dad had a Rocker 32. So I made my own profile from that. And those are still the same profiles we use all the time now, which were just like done in our own basements. It's like we know that it is our tone that we decided that we liked in the moment and literally captured it. So it was pretty cool. But yeah, still definitely an adjustment to not have like that room sound or the amp behind you like bleeding into your vocal mic and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's it. That's a big point. Yeah.
Dude, it's just the realization that like what we were hearing before is the sum of all the parts coming together. And now all we're hearing is what we're sending into the room, like before it can bounce off bodies and walls and everything.
Right.
That tripped me up for so long. Just knowing that it's like, I'm not hearing what's actually out there. I'm hearing the genesis of it, what will become what is produced in the room. Like, yeah.
The input data, so to speak. Yeah. No, and that's a really succinct way of kind of, putting it all down. Because when you're a performer, when you're just using wedges, you're hearing the crowd noise, you're hearing everything on stage. You're in the middle of it, just like the rest of the audience is at a live show. But once you go with like in-ears specifically, and you can try to like put crowd mics up and pipe some of that in, but it's never going to be the same, because effectively then you're hearing, all of that. Like, you are monitoring what's going to then become part of the whole like bouncing around in the room kind of thing, way outside of everybody. So in that way, it's like it quite literally can isolate you as a performer. And you have to find a way to rise above it and kind of trust yourselves and be like, I know that this is doing what it needs to do, because y'all have played shows without them before. So you know what it feels like, what it works like. And you kind of have to trust. Almost sometimes I find myself relying more on my eyes too, to be like, hey, I might feel weird about this in a moment, but like, look around. This is what's happening. Like it, you know what I mean? Like it's clearly going down. But it's an adjustment. But at least what is cool is that there is that really exact extension from a guitar tone standpoint, where it's like, those are the, at least with like the 800, and even like a similar thing, those are the profiles of the sounds that were on the record. It's not like you went through this laundry list of other stuff that you can never get or never take on tour with you. So that's a cool way to connect them and sew that all together. And I think that that goes a long way in helping you feel more comfortable listening back. That means the songs in their ears probably sound that much closer to the record itself, right? Which is helpful and reassuring in its own way, I'd imagine. But yeah, well, gentlemen, this has been awesome. I appreciate you unpacking this record. It makes me miss the barbershop and Brett so much.
Go see the boy. He's wonderful.
Yes, I will. We've got to go see the boy, Tom. When's the last time you've been up there, Tom? I haven't been up there for a while. Well, I'm in Atlanta now, so yeah. Yeah,
Case, it was the same time that you went up. That was my last time up.
Oh, wow. Yes. It's been ages. Well, shout out to Brett. We will say hi. We'll have to have him on too, to kind of talk through more fun studio stuff with him.
Yeah, I'd love to listen to that.
Dude, he would be a sick guest. He'd be a wicked guest to have on.
Well, he's in our sights. We'll have him on. What other record? Well, you've already taken your own record. So what record would you have him cover then? And we'll get after him about it for next season.
The Neighborhood, that Boston Manor record.
Dude, I'd be lying to you if I said that wasn't already in the list.
All right.
Yeah. Full disclosure, have talked about it with the Manor Boys. And so that might be a cool thing where maybe, we'd have to really do some time zone math there to get, with the help of Calendly scheduling, maybe we can get all of them together at once. Who knows, Tom? That, we got a dream here. But anyway, in the meantime, y'all beat him to it, and I am happy. And where can everybody find y'all specifically on your preferred platforms, as it were, to follow along with all Hot Mulliganry?
We are at Hot Mulligan everywhere. Easy.
Got it. Nobody grabbed that nobody sat on that domain. They got it. No, yeah.
Easy peasy.
Brilliant. I love it. All right, cool. Well, gents, thank you again.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you guys.
So a few things became very apparent over the course of this conversation with the guys. One, I think we're definitely going to have our friend Brett Romnes come on the show. He's made some awesome records, not just this Hot Mulligan record. And I'm always up for another opportunity to talk about the barbershop. That studio and that space, the gear is incredible. And some of the albums that have been made there over the years are legendary. Both Tom and I have cut projects out of there in the past, and it's a really inspiring environment to make a record at. The other thing that I really thought was interesting and I want to pull to the foreground is the fact that he did not want to hear the band's demos when they got in the studio and were ready to press go, you know? And I think that's because someone like him has learned over the years that often a producer's greatest power and greatest asset to a project is the objectivity that they can bring. The band is always so close and so deep in the weeds by the time they get into the studio with their songs that it's tough to walk that backwards. And as the person on the other side of the glass, yeah, sometimes you're becoming that additional band member, but you can also bring that perspective. And I think that's what a lot of bands understand about making great records is they have to find a way to let go and extend that trust to somebody else outside of that core group to really see the song not for just what it is and how it is, but what it also can be. So when the time comes, don't be afraid to find someone that can help you pull in that objectivity. And until then, thanks for spending your time with us right here on
The Record Process.